Recording in progress.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me. This is episode 1, part 2 presentation. For additional context, please view part 1 introduction. Please allow 2.5 minutes for a recap and intro for those who missed it from the first episode. This is a public service announcement. I am speaking out to set the record straight on the real reason child trafficking is so rampant, on why institutional and elite pedophilia investigations are halted and covered up, and to explain how this dirty secret ties in with everything that is wrong with the world today, from drug, weapon, and human trafficking, blackmail, extortion, contract killings, political and governmental corruption, to various conspiracies and false flag operations carried out over the years, and now the UAP debacle that is ensuing publicly. This episode will briefly explore the history and explain the existence of this insidious brainwashing on children. To show the 95 presidential committee hearing when this information last really impacted the public. Then go over what happened, what didn't, and how this pattern is reflected over time in cycles. Cycles that must be halted. Cycles that must be broken. Thank you. I'll then brief you on my history, how I tie into this, and take you along the timeline of when I went rogue, acting against the families and the network, after a series of events led to me discovering that I had been groomed and brainwashed, and what I thought was a random series of events in childhood was passively enabled and directly enacted and programmed to mold me and develop me into something different, and something that people need to know exists. All right. I really don't want to be sharing this information. I'm not a very public type of person. This is only possibly troubling for me, although it will be fulfilling, and to be fair. A lot is redacted. A lot of people got fucked up over all this. And I don't give a shit about my own life, again, or I wouldn't be here. A lot of good people have had very bad things happen to them. A lot of innocent people that had nothing to do with any of this. Hit the 45-second intro. Turn this up.
Segment 3 this evening is titled The Children and the CIA. We've learned a lot of unknown activities of the CIA in years past, some of them disturbing, to say the least. Tonight, we'll learn of the agency's interest in children.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's right. Thank you for joining us. We're going to get to the bottom of this shit. I am going to breeze through a brief of history to bring you up to speed with essentially irrefutable evidence and discussion of the history of what got us here, just so we can get to the contemporary issues and how to fix them. I apologize to survivors if this mask and my presence is upsetting. These videos are primarily for the crowd that usually would not pay attention to this sort of subject or necessarily believe it, but I do feel I am the one to present this in such a manner where it will be received. And thus, here I go. There will be a separate series with the organization I work with, Organize Safety, specifically for and aimed to help survivors. So, getting into it. As mentioned, we're not trying to get too far into history, only really what's directly relevant. Of course, there were interests that were behind and funded both sides of World War II. This is irrefutable. It's simple history. The United States itself is not even that old of a country. People think in very small terms, but there are some families that have been in power for a very long time. Regardless, owning on direct matters, at the end of World War II ensued Operation Paperclip, a secret United States intelligence program in which more than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians were taken from former Nazi Germany to the U.S. for government employment after the end of World War II. And we were talking into NASA, Lockheed Martin, into Disney, different aspects. There's a lot about all of that. We don't have time for it. Then what followed was MKUltra, a legal human experimentation program designed and undertaken by the CIA to develop and identify procedures and drugs that could be used during interrogations, forced confessions, brainwashing, psychological torture. Involved covert administration, which is drugging in layman's terms, secretly sneaking a drug into someone's drink or however you know, on a doorknob they touch, whatever the application is. Such as covert administration of high doses of psychoactive drugs, especially LSD, other chemicals without the subject's consent, obviously. Electroshocks, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, other forms of torture. Look, if you watch Netflix, you probably think MKUltra was when, what was this name, Frank Olson, took some LSD and jumped or maybe was pushed from a building. But no, it's so much more than that. And just what they admit on paper, which is this is all derived from declass or, you know, verbatim excerpts, but for MKUltra subtribes involved research on children. It was a lot more than that. Breezing past this 11-year-old boy, partial change of identity with remote stimulation of his brain, electrode, brain implant, shocking, you know, I mean, let's get with it. Okay, in the late 70s, supposedly this program was shut down. Of course, the research was done into operational programs, but then, you know, some of the evidence was not destroyed, which was ordered destroyed. And some of that came out and led to hearings and everything, and that was in the 70s. So, very quickly, what we will do is give you a rundown on MKUltra and a few quotes. This is all from declassified material. This is material that I compiled myself in 2016. Anyways, what exactly was MKUltra and all that research about? Take note of some of the substances and objectives, which were specifically focused on keeping the whole issue covert, clandestine, classified, secret, hidden, occult. We're researching behavioral modification, all aspects, from ensuring the public is compliant and complacent through frequencies and different shows and psychological influence and cultural influence to direct brainwashing of people. And a lot of these methods were to ensure that we can keep a lid on it. We had to create the walls around everything so we could ensure these secret programs are secret. MKUltra used numerous methodologies to manipulate people's mental states and alter brain functions, including serendipitous administration, that is secret, hidden, drugging someone, of drugs, especially LSD and other chemicals, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, and other forms of various torture. In one document from 1955, practically 70 years ago, substances which will, this is what they're researching, substances which will promote illogical thinking and impulsiveness to the point where the recipient would be discredited in public. Now, don't get me wrong, we do have various problems, various mental health problems, but a lot of them are not what they seem. And I guarantee you, some people running out in shock and extreme duress might have a reason for it, and they might not be able to articulate it, but something might be going on. And then further so, they may have been drugged with a substance to make them act a fool, essentially. Substances which increase the efficiency of mentation and perception. So we were talking about some stimulant, some sort of speed. I'm trying to, I hope you can understand this. And this won't be new to people. Materials which will cause the victim to age faster or slower. Promote the intoxicating effect of alcohol, which, I mean, come on. Produce signs and symptoms of recognized diseases in a reversible way. The malingering. temporary or permanent brain damage and loss of memory. Substances which enhance the ability of individuals to withstand provocation, torture, coercion, brainwashing methods. Physical methods producing shock and confusion over extended periods of time. Materials and physical methods which will produce amnesia for events preceding during their use. And a large tool, nowadays it's really scary, but a large tool was scopolamine, and NASA even made scopolamine aerosol, which was used in many things. But scopolamine is also known as the zombie drug or devil's breath, commonly used in South America to make people essentially willingly empty their bank account. If you give them too much, they get violent. It's known as devil's breath because it makes the breath smell horrid, and you have amnesia after the events, but you are essentially a compliant zombie in the meantime, if the dosage is right. So it's just, we're getting into this. So they're doing everything. Substances which promote weakness or distortion of eyesight and hearing. Substances which lower the ambition and general working efficiency of man when administered in undetectable amounts. It can give you saltpeter, right, in the military, for example. Some people will know what I'm talking about here. If you know, you know. Is that what the fuck they say? Going on, we get it. MKUltra is fucked. Project Artichoke, Project Bluebird. Look, Project Bluebird, there was a book written about it. By it's unethical experiments conducted by psychiatrists to create amnesia, new identities, hypnotic access codes, and new memories in the minds of experimental subjects, based on 15,000 pages of documents obtained under the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA. And this doctor was a past president of the International Society for Study of Dissociation, the ISSTD. And you will learn about them. You will learn where people that have been involved with such experiments tend to go. And yes, we have some random ads on this old 2016 posting that I made. Don't mind that. We're talking about maturing candidates. We're talking about sleeper agents, okay? Experiments to create maturing candidates super spies must be understood in their social and historical context, one which is of pervasive, systematic mind control experimentation, not by a few isolated renegade doctors, but by the leaders of psychiatry in the major medical schools. Because this book is likely to, this is a quote from the back of the book, because this book is likely to provoke extreme reactions, I have taken great care to present only facts which are fully documented and based on objective public domain information. And all this is easy to verify. And so it's talking about basically trauma, torture, dissociation is used to create a dissociative identity disorder that meets the following criteria. Created deliberately, because they do create this deliberately, or at least build upon already created dissociation from childhood abuse, which is necessary. A new identity is implanted, and amnesia barriers are created, and these subjects are used in simulated or actual operations. Of course, they have to be used and simulated if they are ever to be operational, right? You would hope. The people running these programs, though, are not even sketchy at best. They're fucking ridiculous fucking monsters, but they're also idiots in many cases. That the CIA created maturing candidates is a fact and easy to understand and justify from a national security perspective. Wartime measures for wartime strategy, wartime methods. The participation of psychiatrists in medical schools in mind control was not a few scattered doctors. It was systematic, organized, and involved many leading psychiatrists. Okay, yes, we can get to this, obviously, through PAPERCLIP. We got a lot of people and continued experiments from Auschwitz, which we went into a little bit in the intro. And here we go. So we have a few doctors. I'll rip a few quotes that were involved in this. And we're talking about way back. Let's see, this was in a 1968 article, but it was a previous quote from G.H. Estabrooks. He is known for hypno-programming U.S. government agents during World War II. Quotes, I can hypnotize a man without his knowledge or consent into committing treason against the United States. Is hypnosis dangerous? It can be. Under certain circumstances, it is dangerous to the extreme. It has been known to lead to murder. Given the right combination of hypnotist and subject, hypnosis can be a lethal weapon. Oh, they're getting good now. The key to creating an effective spy or assassin rests in splitting a man's personality or creating a multi-personality with the aid of hypnotism. This is not science fiction. I have done it. And then he goes on to explain exactly how he did it in order to... I worked this technique with a vulnerable Marine, Lieutenant I'll call Jones. Under the watchful eye of Marine intelligence, I split his personality into Jones A and Jones B. Once a normal working Marine, he became entirely different. He talked communist doctrine and meant it. He was welcomed enthusiastically by communist cells, and was deliberately given a dishonorable discharge by the corps, which was in on the plot as cover. This is an undercover sleeper, and he became a card-carrying member. All I had to do was hypnotize the man, get in touch with Jones B., the loyal American, and I had a pipeline straight into the communist camp. Do you understand this? War is end of all law. When we speak of keeping rules within the rules of the game, we are childish, because it is not a game and true rules never hold. In the last analysis, any device is justifiable which enables us to protect ourselves from defeat. You understand? The fact that they are making sleepers is unquestionable. We have plenty here. We're talking about in the newspaper other doctors. We're talking about how killers trained by U.S. Navy, and they were taking murderers from prisons and training them, and then stationing them at consulates and embassies, and as consulates and embassies and whatnot. And we're just getting more and more into this. They're going into the desensitizing, into stress reduction training. The best killers remain with passive-aggressive personalities. They're people with a lot of drive, though well-disciplined, do not appear nervous. Periodically experience bursts of explosive energy, and they can literally kill without remorse. The men selected are brought either to the Navy's neuropsychiatrist laboratory or to the laboratory at another location. They're first taught to shoot, and then the Clockwork Orange training begins in earnest to rid them of any qualms they may have about killing. The men are shown a special series of films to heighten their dissociative powers with regard to killing. The films are gruesome. As the training proceeds, they get progressively more horrific. Even so, the trainee is forced to watch. His head is bolted into a clamp so he cannot turn away, and a special mechanism ensures he cannot close his eyelids. Dr. Nehru said this is one of the first films the trainee sees as a brutal, blow-by-blow account of African youth being crudely circumcised by fellow members of his tribe. No anesthetic is used, and the knife is obviously blunt. When the film is over, the trainees ask us questions as what color was the belt on the doctor's trousers? What was the motive on the handle of the knife which the circumcision was made? From here, the trainees proceed to films with people from a little near home. In one, the camera follows the movements of a man at work of a sawmill, slicing planks of wood along their length. The film shows his thrusting movements back and forth until he suddenly slips, cutting his finger off. In this way, said Dr. Nehru, many of the trainees learn how to cope, and with even the most gruesome scenes, with complete detachment. If psychological measures like heart and breathing rate, which respond dramatically during the early films, calm down and resume their normal patterns, as more bloodthirsty scenes are shown, the men are judged to have completed the stage. So they're basically just getting control and learning to dissociate, to be able to act and think under extreme stress and pressure, especially when it's getting fucking rough. Dehumanization of the enemy. In this last phase, the idea is to give the men to think the potential enemies they have will face are inferior forms of life. It's lectures and films now which portray personalities in custom and foreign countries whose interests may go against the U.S., but the films and lectures are specially biased to present the enemy as less than human. The stupidity of local customs is ridiculed. Local personalities may be presented as evil demigods rather than legitimate political figures. And right now, these same tactics are being used to the general public against both sides of both political parties. But I'm here to tell you, no one is coming to save you. Do not trust the plan. Don't do... What you need to do is take a reasonable look at the situation that's going on and think what can be done. And I am here to present what I feel is a great solution I have been carrying out and set up a machine that is carrying out 100 times over, that will continue with or without me, which is now I am taking the risk again to speak out. I think we have established, and if you look up any of this, going into Donald Ewan Cameron, who was the head of the Canadian Psychiatric Association and American World Psychiatric Associations, then he was doing all the electric shock research, and there's a lot of actual justice finally happening there in Canada, and that was McGill University and things like that, which Ewan Cameron was from, and he would commute from Montreal, Quebec, down to Albany, back and forth, so on and so forth. All of this is declassified. There is a massive amount of information on this. And just to be clear, MKUltra, what was released on paper, that research was undertaken at 80 institutions, 44 colleges and universities, as well as hospitals, prisons, and pharmaceutical companies. And the CIA operated through these institutions using front organizations, although sometimes top officials of these institutions were aware of the CIA's involvement. And it's the same now. There are some people complicit, but there is a web, and it's controlled. And you cannot buck it. They will end your career, they will end your life, they will end your family's life. They will make you look crazy. They control everything. They set the policy. And they would come in with national security if you really want to buck the situation. And your plea will never hear the light of day, which is part of what happened to me. But here I go again. Let's get to the fucking point, right? Anyways, we're about to get to where this started hitting the public and showing you what happened last in the public. But 77 things started to get released, and people were talking about it. It was first brought to public attention in 1975 by the Church Committee, and then there was a commission, the MKULTRA 77 Commission, which you had seen the paper with the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and Human Research and whatnot. In 77, a huge cache of documents, 20,000, were released, and then in 2001, some more. Now, for example, this sort of information started to be disseminated. And we'll glance back for a second, but it's the late 70s that started coming out, and by the time you would hit the 90s, it was coming out about radiation experiments.
Who were fed Quaker oats, laced or flavored with radiation, take your pick. What about the radiation experiments on the pregnant women at Vanderbilt University Hospital, or the 18 innocents, including Mrs. Bell's father, who were injected with plutonium without their knowledgeable consent?
Pregnant women injected with plutonium? Yes, this is declassified. And this is public record, and that's what they admit to. Vanderbilt in Nashville, Tennessee, yes. Okay, we fucking get it, right? And we're about to get to the apology and all this, but just to be clear, a slight brief again, just on this brainwashing program. It's pretty well known that the government got involved with mind control, mind manipulation, psychological warfare, covert espionage, extracting truth from spies, creating impenetrable double agents, sleeper programmed assassins, assets, mentoring candidates, a lot of the stuff that was in MKUltra, Paperclip, Bluebird, that actually didn't get destroyed when it was ordered. And it wasn't just the U.S. government. Obviously, a lot originated in Germany, again, with the Paperclip scientists coming in and the Nazis being involved with occultic religions, if you remember the Nazis, and there's lots of information and people that have done research on this, the SS and everybody in the Black Sun, and getting involved with all the different occult powers and ancient texts. And they realized that the same techniques used in those religious ceremonies and the groups could be used for government purposes. The chanting, obviously the use of drugs, and just peer pressure, extreme methods, trauma bonding, doing unimaginable acts because of a higher power is involved, or at least perceived to be involved. Just everything, repetitive symbols and triggers, sex rituals, so on and so forth. And China also seemed to go straight in with the trauma and abuse, and especially with the organ harvesting and so on and so forth. And obviously, again, Nazi Germany had no problem doing anything medical, drugs, surgical trauma, and they had Mengele and were doing horrible experiments at Auschwitz for vital thresholds to see how far you could take something before it would kill the subject. And, obviously China and Germany virtually had endless supplies, because China, with their population and how they have the separation of the classes in extreme situations in some areas, and obviously Germany with the prisons, ghettos, concentration camps. So after the Cold War, the U.S. government took in all the scientists, or many, along with Russia and Japan and other places from Germany. And we kept on with the MKUltra testing. But here's what happened. Once it started to come out in 77, 75, 77, the government learned, look, we can't really control this once it got out. And also, their most effective methods had the highest failure rates. So what they needed to do was push everything further undercover, further into the private sector, plausible deniability, right? The public was starting to talk about it, and we will see exactly how much here shortly. And just for overall appearances of ending the Cold War, so to speak, basically this stuff really got pushed over. Now, we had already learned, a large part from the Germans, but everything, who had belief in occult practices, that there was a lot of truths that were known in the Eastern cultures and occult methods that weren't really accepted in Western science, such as epigenetics, how things are passed down, how talents, how your ancestors impact you today. And, a lot of this had a lot of cult activity that was used as a means to an end of specific trauma, which is essentially dark neuroscience, specific trauma to elicit effects such as Stockholm Syndrome, brainwashing, but specific effects. And this is all an intelligent evil. You will see. And just essentially, a lot of the, and this will all be exposed, and we will probably do a separate episode to really go into this, but the satanic panic was merely activity that was covered up, and certain disprovable elements that perhaps some being a little more ridiculous were purposely elevated so they could smear them and disprove them to smear the rest by proxy. And then there was a couple real things that broke through and were looked at, but then we'll stomp that down. I understand it's hard for the layman to look at, but we will help clarify everything. Anyways, needing to partition this off, homegrown cults, as well as the secret societies that were already more of a sophisticated cult, were prime source for test subjects and basic conditioning, so to speak. So they were bedfellows for doing non-authorized, non-official government experimentation and trauma-based mind control. So, for example, this is plausible deniability. The CIA would bring in coke, and they would hand it to cartels, or they would hand it to gangs and other people to distribute. Plausible deniability. What would they do? And they created the environment for this to happen. They created the environment and allow, instead of stop, which they could, allow a lot of this human trafficking and cult activity to continue, specifically so they can siphon off assets and resources. Okay? This is, again, the gray area. Yes, and this is how things work in the deep, dark intelligence operations and with the rulers of the world. They are just making sure that people make the mess they can pull something useful from and keep it as business as usual. And then plus you have people trying to clean up their own mess and you can't ever gain sight of the big picture. I mean, this is just how it works. And again, we will make everything clear. It might take a few of fucking these if I'm still around, but I'm going to make this one fucking count. So homegrown cults and these secret societies, such as Masons, who the lower levels are taught bullshit and basically used as pawns. Yeah, as a contractor, I used to get fed information from low-level Masonic police officers routinely to be used in operations. And I can guarantee you they didn't know what, because that is protocol. But they were feeding me information and bad things would happen. Do you understand? And then this is what happens is, it is used to create, again, the culture of silence. So this more specific corruption can exist within. And then these people say, oh, I don't know about this, I'm a Mason. This shit's not real. You dumb little fucking pawn bitch. Yeah, you don't know about it. And all you want to do is get a little bit more clout with your friends or maybe climb the ranks. And I can understand trying to do better for yourself and perhaps your family. But what's happening again is you're participating in upholding a group, a culture for this corruption to exist within. And this is how it operates. So they're using homegrown cults, secret societies, Masons, and then more selective, exclusive, upper echelon secret societies such as Yale, Skull and Bones, and related as bedfellows. Because everybody understands the future power that needs to be harnessed wasn't just military might, but also political might, and also organized brotherhood, which again is what these secret societies form and these cults. So essentially, through this and creating an environment and getting a few different machines rolling in self-sustaining situations that are enabled, they are essentially controlling the drug trade, porn industry, sex trade, human trafficking, and all the different industry with money. And they have people everywhere. We talked about this legislative, executive, judicial to unite the separation of powers, so on and so forth globally. And again, this brief goes into talking about the Iran-Contra affairs and the CIA, and we kind of went over this. We went over this last time. But again, so as all this started coming out, it became clear, again, as this all started to get declassified, it became clear that there was some bad things going on, ran by the powers that be, so to speak, with the MKUltra and all this. And what else was going on? We are now going to jump to the late 90s, where we talked about this shortly in the intro. But information also started coming up about how we had created the CIA crack epidemic. I'll just call it that. And that wasn't the only thing that got named, because there was blackmail, extortion, and assassination and influence of politics, yes, on U.S. soil, not just third world countries. And see, we were going into the outer north, and there was information on this. And a lot of whistleblowers, a lot of people were killed. And they're going into people, Kissinger, who anybody in the fold knows, just everybody. You know, here's the names. Here's the names. And yes, this was a while ago. William Colby, we know this. Oliver North, we know this. But there's also a lot of names we don't know in this. And then, of course, and mentioning Skull and Bones and whatnot, of course, we have Oliver North, who was overseeing some of this. Yes, Clinton was involved in Mena, Arkansas, and all the cocaine trafficking. Come on, this is all public information, and people act like, oh, the Clinton scandal? Shut the fuck up. This has been public information. Yes, and all the human trafficking? Yes, to funnel assets. Yes, this is all going to come together and make sense. And it wasn't just the Clintons, it wasn't just Gore being involved, but yes, this led to Bush as well, who they were retaining through operating the CIA and other things. You know, they were embezzling billions of dollars, and that was to create literally this worldwide shadow government. And they were just an arm of that. Yes, we have names, and this was from 97, this article, I believe. Okay, so what happened since then? Not shit, except for in the background. So, anyways, yes, there was documents supplied, blah, 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 blah. And
I will tell you, Director Deutsch, as a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, that the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.
Or perhaps did recruit, and he didn't want to admit that. Ooh, that's a conversation we will get to shortly. All right, so, yes, it's declassified. They're making spies, split personality sleepers. They are importing cocaine. They're building a fucking shadow government and assassinating and controlling politics. We know this. We've known this for years. What else happened? What else happened now? In the 90s, and we are getting to the end of this, to where we will get forward with the story, but this is the most important, and this is where we start the blueprint of what can be done by the public. I've had to quickly get familiar with this setup and other things I'm not used to using, so forgive the pace here. So, we will go to videos. And, of course, just briefly, let me solidify the CIA coke and attitude situation.
West Los Angeles, all the possible connections by the CIA on the sale of narcotics.
The possible connections of the CIA. Are you fucking kidding me? I mean, look, he comes, he asks him about fucking, is he doing stuff? He's looking at him like he's crazy, and he's like, we can't talk about that, and even if we did, I think that's ridiculous, because, you know, we would never do that. And then, basically, it goes, now what happens? He's saying, let me come up there, because we know this. We have the paperwork.
We are proceeding.
That's,
And here's the evidence in this special report. If anybody cares to
they had the evidence.
We understand.
And what happened? Okay, well, we'll have a hearing about it. Oh, well, things happen this hearing and due to technicalities. Well, maybe next year. Look, y'all. I think we all know the way things go. This is controlled from the top down. I mean, this is embarrassing. I can't even watch anymore with that. Now, here's where shit really fucking hit the fan. Now we're getting into this. So that's established. Woo! Buddy. So, now we go to 94. And they have what's called the Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments. And I had showed you the brief clip where they mentioned injecting pregnant women with plutonium and other children and so on and so forth. In 94, Clinton came in. Yes, Clinton, fresh out of controlling Mena, Arkansas airport or providing protection as governor there to ensure that they can run black operations, importation of cocaine, and so much more. Yes, that Clinton. Anyway, so he started the Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments, which was established in 1994 to investigate questions out of the record of the United States government with respect to human radiation experiments. Now, this says human radiation experiments, but I want you to realize this also was still MKUltra still, and MKUltra-derived research and all that. Now, we went into some other things, and he was apologizing for the Tuskegee experiments and other things as well. But this human radiation experiments was still directly related with MKUltra. And keep in mind, we started looking into this at 75 and then 77. You know, they had basically the hearing or the paper. And so now it's 94. So Bill Clinton starts the Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments. Because people already had the evidence for all this shit. Okay? And we already had the evidence. I say we. I was very young. At this point, I was 8. But people had the fucking evidence already for everything. Okay, so what we had in part of the ACHRE, which was the Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments, was testimony of U.S. mind control on child victims. Yes. What? Yes, that's right. That's right. And this is what we're going to get into right now, is the testimony of the child victims, but more importantly, of the people that represented them. And what's going on is these victims end up going to therapists. And they might not even know they were mind controlled or have an inkling of a clue they were put through these experiments or anything. But what happens is they end up realizing it, or some already knew, so on and so forth. Bottom line is, a mass amount of people, and there's so many that don't go to therapists. That's what you have to understand. But there is a mass amount of people that end up going to therapists, eventually go to trauma therapists, and this information starts getting compiled. And then in the field, obviously there's limits to what therapists and what not can share, but then information started massively corroborating. And when information blindly corroborates, it's hard to think that that could be made up. This is where it gets serious. And this is the blueprint.
In listening to the testimony today, it all sounds really familiar. I am here to talk about a possible link between radiation and mind control experimentation that began in the late 1940s. The main reason mind control research is being mentioned is because people are alleging that they were exposed as children to mind control, radiation, drugs, and chemical experimentation, which were administered by the same doctors who are known to have been involved in conducting both radiation and mind control research.
Again, so the information came out. There was already the doctors that they remembered, they see, are the same doctors that were actually on paper for the mind control and for the radiation. But what essentially is the U.S. government never admitted, yes, we were doing mind control experiments on children. Yes, some of the, documents firmly say that. But what you got to understand is, who is the person to admit it? The doctor that did it? The other people? These are black operations. And the people, the bureaucrats and the people in these courts and everything, they're not about to say, yes, I know they do it. You can't even say that. Do you understand? Do you understand the way this works? It's fucking ridiculous. But anyways, it's about to get very important.
Written documentation has been provided revealing the names of people and the names of research projects in statements from people across the country. It is also important to understand that mind control techniques and follow-ups into adulthood may have been used to intimidate these particular research subjects.
Okay, so they had written documentation they're providing there, and they're basically saying that these tactics are being used. They're basically saying they're threatening and harassing these victims to stay quiet into adulthood.
Into not talking about their victimization in government research. As a therapist for the past 22 years, I have specialized in treating victims and perpetrators of trauma and their families. When word got out that I was appearing at this hearing, nearly 40 therapists across the country, and I had about a week and a half to prepare.
When word got out that she was going to this hearing, nearly 40 therapists nationwide in a week and a half. Okay? So only a week and a half for the news to spread and them to know. And you got to keep in mind, back then, there wasn't much internet and shit like this. You understand? In a week and a half, 40 contacted her. How many didn't know? How many were scared? You understand? And she was doing this for over 40 years. Because these victims have been around telling the same story. There are groups within this world that know exactly what's going on. But you have to understand how attacked these therapists were. That we have the false memory syndrome, and anybody that tried to help these subjects would be accused of implanting memories and so on and so forth. They could lose their license, their career, their well-being, the ability to support their family. Or, if they didn't comply and were doing a lot of damage, yes, they would be killed. Their family would be killed. They will be smeared. Everything. This is how dirty shit goes. And again, this is March 15th, 1995. This hearing took place before Bill Clinton's apology, for which you will see shortly, which I believe was in October. So again, she's supplying information from nearly 40 therapists, which see multiple clients, and it's corroborating information of names, places, records, projects, programs, people involved. And this was in 1995.
Contacted me to talk about clients who had reported being subjects in radiation and mind control across in treating victims and into not talking about their victimization in government research. As a therapist for the past 22 years, I have specialized in treating victims and perpetrators of trauma and their families. When word got out that I was appearing at this hearing, nearly 40 therapists across the country, and I had about a week and a half to prepare, contacted me to talk about clients who had reported being subjects in radiation and mind control experiments.
That is the beginning of the blueprint.
The consistency of people's stories about the purpose of the mind control and pain induction techniques such as electric shock, use of hallucinogens, sensory deprivation, hypnosis, dislocation of limbs, and sexual abuse is remarkable. There is almost nothing published on this aspect of mind control used with children, and these clients come from all over the country, having had no contact with each other.
Blind corroboration of the same information, okay? And that was in a week and a half, 40, without fucking internet. Oh, don't worry, we'll get to it. Again, that was the beginning of the blueprint for what the fuck we're doing. And it's easy. And I can't believe that nothing had been done like this before. There are many people sprinkled in various areas back then who allowed the situation now to take place. But guess how many kids didn't get saved? And you don't understand. This isn't one for one. There are an immeasurable amount of failures. People whose families, their lives were ruined. People suffering, shaking in a mental institution in a padded cell. That have lost their mind, that self-harm, they would have been able to lead a normal life. The damage done is immeasurable to the family unit, to a culture that breaks family units, even for ones that don't ever get to this program. They created a culture to keep people oppressed, to keep people broken, and to be able to pull useful assets from, because they do not need assets with families that care about them and would stop these things from taking place. They need assets that are reliant upon them. And they need assets that come already abused to be dissociative, which is required. And there's a lot of information, but that is the most important element. Because, one, if you want to train someone the best, you have to start young. Just like a dog, just like anything you train. You instill from young. That is how you do it. If you raise anybody to be the best, the people nowadays in sports, a lot of these people are generational and they train from young. That's just simply how it goes. And it's the same in war. It's the same with spies, especially when you're conditioning for extreme situations. That's just how it has to go. They have to start from young. And again, this dissociation, that's just training alone. The dissociation to build these sleeper personas, to build these dissociative identity disorders, that has to happen in child. You can't take a normal, healthy adult and torture him to have a dissociative personality. Perhaps now with technology you can insert this sort of thing, but if you torture an adult, they'll get messed up permanently. They don't dissociate, because what happens is you were born disintegrated and the different parts of your brain and psyche integrate as you age. So essentially this process is halted, and then through more trauma, these divisions can be further divided into compartments, just like folders in a computer to program and run programs. Yes. But this trauma has to take place when they're young. So, she had all the information, they had networked. This is obviously happening, blindly corroborating evidence, people saying the same thing, they don't know each other.
What was startling was that therapists reported many of these common today control arm retrieval techniques contained in the CIA, and whatever is left, along with evidence social